you can see the title of my talk is going to be 3 answers. And so I'm going to answer 3 questions. And we're going to cover about 4,000 years of philosophy in about 1 hour and 15 minutes. So hang on and hold on. I think probably this audience, this is probably going to be a review, summary and review of a lot of material rather than new material. But I found that in doing apologetics, I bump into the kind of issues that I'm going to address in this talk over and over and over again. And it's that people don't fundamentally understand how to think. And there's also a fundamental disconnect between, in the conversation today between science and faith, that argument that's going on, particularly with the anti-theists, Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett and guys like that. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So, what are the questions that I'm going to answer? The first one is, why is there anything? That's sort of the most fundamental metaphysical question of all. Why is there anything? And I'm going to answer that last, because before we can get to that, we have to answer these 2 questions. What exists and how do I know? Now, these are questions in philosophy of ontology, what exists, and it's just a Greek word that means the study of what's real. God, souls, minds, angels, demons, Satan, physical things, elves, fairies, orcs. And how do I know? Because that's the second question that immediately you ask yourself, right? What exists? And I say, well, God exists. Well, how do you know? How do I know? Okay, so epistemology and the subject of how do I know is epistemology. And so another Greek word, nothing to be afraid of. And these subjects they're intimately related. You can't talk about one without talking about the other. And so what we're going to do now is I'm going to talk about ontology first, what exists, and then I'm going to talk about how do I know, and then after I've done that, then we're going to talk about why is there anything, okay? And then after that, I'm going to show you what the Bible says about faith is really different than what said about faith in the 21st century today. Okay, so what I'm going to present is a common sense ontology. It's called moderate realism or Aristotelian realism. And in this ontology, I'm going to suggest that there are 2 kinds of substances. And when I say substances, I'm not talking about something that you can hold in your hand or that's physical. I'm talking about just something that is real. It has ontological status. Okay, so there are 2 kinds in this ontology. There's the material world, or sometimes we'll say concrete, and there's the immaterial, or the abstract substances. Okay? So how to describe the material world, or the concrete world? And I think that let me go ahead and get these up here. Anything that's material, and just think about this. I mean, this is just, like I say, common sense. If something exists, if something is material, then it's located, or we might say extended in space and time. Okay, I can find it somewhere in the universe. If it's physical, given enough time and a powerful enough spaceship, I could get there and I could find it. Okay, things that are physical have mass. Things that are physical, material, or concrete are subject to the laws of physics. They can be converted to energy. Or if they are energy, we would say they can heat or move matter. Okay, so and I've tried to be as generous in that description as possible in that ontology, because there, as we'll see here in a minute, there are, in fact, it's the prevailing viewpoint in academia and in contemporary philosophy and science, that these are the only things that exist. Okay, so there are some serious implications for that. As you might, I mean, if this is all that exists, if all that exists are material, concrete, physical things, then God does not exist, because God is not material. All right. So anyway, so how do we describe immaterial or abstract things? In just the reverse. Immaterial or abstract things are not located or extended in space and time. Think about mathematics, for example. You know, where do you find mathematics? You know, it's not under the podium. You know, it's nowhere. All right, yet it's real. Mathematics has no mass. You can't weigh it. You can't physically detect it. It's not subject to the laws of physics. It can't be converted to energy, and it cannot move or heat matter. Okay, so that's the common sense ontology. So there are three views of what exists in general, and professional philosophers are going to be cringing if anyone ever sees this, but this is like a 100,000-foot view, but we only have an hour and 15 minutes. There's idealism, which I won't really talk about at all today because it's not part of the conversation, and that is that only the immaterial world exists. This can be traced back to Bishop Berkeley back in the mid-18th century. There's naturalism, which says that the material world is the only world that exists. And under the rubric of naturalism, there's also two other isms that I just want to mention, and that is materialism. This sort of used to be called materialism, the idea that, and sometimes it still is, and this is why it's kind of confusing, but so you'll have to give me a little bit of a break. Sometimes I'll use these terms interchangeably. But as physics developed and physics, you know, discovered energy and realized that it wasn't that, you know, matter did not just mean physical things, materialism sort of fell out of disuse a little bit. And so naturalism was a broader, more encompassing term. And then you'll also maybe hear the term physicalism, which is a philosophy of mind term, which means that essentially that the mind is the brain. Okay, that there is no mind that's separate from the body. All right, and that's physicalism. And so all of those are sort of rolled, you know, naturalism is the umbrella, you know, that encompasses all of those other two terms. And then there's dualism. And dualism, which is what I am and what I hope what you are or will be, is a position that both the material and the immaterial world exist or real. Okay. So that's a quick and dirty on ontology, and now we're going to get into the epistemology part of this, which how do I know? And I'm going to say, ultimately, there's one way to know. Ultimately, there's one way to know, and I'm going to list two ways to know here. so you think I'm going to violate the law of non-contradiction, but I'm going to hide out in the word ultimately. Okay. These next 2 points are intermediately. I already got a million slides. I just didn't want to, you know, torture you with even more. Okay. The first way that we know of things is with sense experience. Okay. And I'll have another slide on that in just a second, so I won't say any more on that, except our senses give us access to the material world, all right? And then we have the exercise of reason or thinking, which gives us access to the immaterial or the abstract world, okay? So that's my claim. And my other claim is that there are no privileged truth claims. And this sort of gets back to that, you know, science versus faith thing. I'm a person of science, you know, you're a person of faith. I'm a person of reason, you're a person of, well, just to be blunt, stupidity, you know, because this, and you'll see about how faith is defined in modern culture. I mean, that's exactly what it means, essentially. And we have certain ways of figuring out what's real, and you have certain ways of figuring out what's real, and ours are valid, and yours are not, and so on. Well, I'm saying that that's all hogwash, okay? I'm saying there's one way to know, and that there are no privileged truth claims. None, whether they're scientific or they're religious or they're economic or political or philosophical or whatever kind of truth claims they are. Ultimately, there's one way to know. Okay, here's the picture of sense experience. We have sight, we hear, we smell, we taste, we touch, and that's what gives us access to the material world. Now, our senses may deceive us, right? We know that. You know, there's mirages in the desert. You know, we can stand on the railroad tracks and look down. You know, the railroad tracks, they look like they're converging. I mean, they're not, but they look like they are. If we put a pencil in a glass of water, it looks like it's bent, right? So I just want to make the point now that our senses can deceive us. All right, and you'll see why in a minute why I make that point. So as I'm thinking about senses and sense experience, 3 questions occurred to me. The first one is, how is it that we experience millions of sensations, second by second, day by day, year by year, you know, from start to finish, as a unified, coherent whole? Because I'm right now, all of us are being bombarded, as it were, with with visual stimulation, auditory stimulation. You know, maybe if you're tasting that coffee or donut that you just drank, you know, there's a taste going on. You're sitting in the chair, you feel things, okay? So, but yet you don't experience those as hundreds or thousands or millions of different stimulations or sensory experiences. You experience a unified, coherent whole. Well, how is that? Okay? The second thing is how do we account for